So today we are going to examine nuclear energy not as a legacy asset, but as a forward-looking complement to renewables. It explores how India's energy architecture must balance ambition with grid stability. It also considers the geopolitical implications of fuel security and technology partnerships. And to discuss that, we are joined by Group Captain Dr. Ajay Lele from MP IDSA. Can we have you on the stage, sir? Mr. Prasanjit Pal from NTPC Parmanu Urja Nigam Limited. Mr. Amit Sharma from Tata Consulting Engineers. Dr. Palash Srivastava from IIFCL. And to moderate this critical discussion, we have Mr. Anish Day, Global Head, Energy and Natural Resources, KPMG India. Thank you so much. And I think India's net zero journey will not be defined by ideology. It will be defined by engineering, capital discipline, and policy coherence. Over to you, Mr. Day. Thank you.
Thank you, and very good morning to everyone. Everyone is, half the everyone is represented over here, and we have already had a fantastic opening discussion. So we're going to build on that and share some of those thoughts. I'm sure people are going to come in because it's a Saturday, it's an early morning start, but it's a wonderful day, and we are set for a wonderful discussion as already, was pointed out initially. This is a very, very critical issue. I'm going to spend a few minutes to put a little more context to the needs because I see that India is very, very differently placed now, like what we have heard even the PM say yesterday. We are on track to become the third largest economy in the world, and that growth will be energy hungry. So when we are looking, we are already at 500 gigawatts of capacity at this time, and we are going to potentially by 2047, if we consider the energy mix coming from various sources, we are looking at a grid which is of the order of 2,000 gigawatts. Okay, that's very large, and that's large because also there is going to be a fair amount of renewables in that, wind and solar. But we have to also take note that wind and solar have the intermittency problems. And if you have to run an industrial scale economy, an industrial economy with the scale that we are talking about, then you need baseload generation which you can rely on. And given the decarbonization asks of the world, irrespective of the politics in the US, the fact is that the planet is warming up. So we will need low carbon or zero carbon sources of energy. And nuclear is the path forward for that. It's a great thing to see how the tone and accent has changed over in nuclear in the last 3 years. I go back to COP28 when I was there, and there was just, very fleeting mentions of nuclear, but people were finding the confidence to mention it at least. Before that, there was no mention also, it was a pariah. But in the last 2 years, nuclear has come at the center stage. And in India, in particular, given that we are looking to, the scale which we are looking at, it's become the key focus. And that's why we are starting the day today with this topic. Just as context, we are just under 9 gigawatt of nuclear energy at this point of time. We are looking in the next 20 years, 21 years, to take that more than tenfold to 100 gigawatts. We are also looking at a range of technologies because we realize that there are some current preferences, but then we'll have to evolve over a period of time. Most importantly, we have had a landmark legislation on the play, which will change the shape of the industry, but it has certain contours which we need to understand and then act on those contours because it does allow private sector participation, which is necessary. The government recognizes that, but there are boundaries to that participation as well. We also have different kind of demand coming in. So we have data centers coming in, for example, which are gigawatt scale data centers. And just that we understand for context, India consumes 20% of data of the world. It has only 2.5, 3% of the data center capacity, which is why we saw that in the union budget, there's a massive thrust on data centers because it's about data sovereignty, data security, but it's also about building the whole ecosystem, a modern nation together. There are questions on supply chains which we will explore. There are questions on pricing, tariffs we'll explore. There are questions on commercial mechanisms which have to be talked about. There's also an issue of trust because when we are looking at building on such a large scale, there are still, while nuclear has come back to the discussion firmly, there's still apprehensions and there'll still be stakeholders whose trust we have to earn. So how do we go about that? Those are the questions for the panel. Just as a little additional context, because there are, when we were talking about the scale of nuclear, post 2032, we have to go beyond 5 gigawatt per annum, and that is a massive scale. I mean, before that, 2.5 gigawatt is the target, but post 2032, it's 5 gigawatt per annum. It's a massive question of supply chains, talent, land, everything. And those are the things which we want to explore. I'm going to ask every panelist, and you've seen their names, they are the leaders in this industry. And as I said in the beginning itself, we had some fantastic discussions while we were prepping for this panel, and we'll build on those. But I'm going to start with asking each panelist to tell their story about how they and their organization have been involved in India's nuclear agenda. And a follow-on question which I want to bring over there in the same opening questions, opening comments from you, is to say that we have had the landmark Shanti Bill. Okay, how far does it take us? And what would be the path forward on some of them? Because there's so much of discussion on the bill itself. So even in the beginning itself, if you could bring that high-level perspective, and then we'll explore in detail. I'm going to go to Mr. Prasenjit Pal, who was a former ED nuclear at NTPC and former CEO of NTPC Paramanu Urja Nigam Limited, for your opening comments.
Thank you, Anish. A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and my most respected co-panelists. The story of nuclear and NTPC goes back to 2011. That is when the government of India thought that we should really start with opening up the nuclear sector. Unfortunately, although we established a joint venture company at that point of time, then Fukushima happened and the international thought process traveled in a particular way, and the government then thought that we should go slow on that. So things didn't really take off the way we were anticipating. Over the years, of course, the Ukraine scenario and what happened in Europe has changed the entire world energy perspective, and the geopolitics of the day have driven two basic thoughts. One, the urgent need to decarbonize the energy sector, and two, the the lack of dependence on the earlier cheap gas which was available to Europe. That really set people thinking. So, and of course, renewables being non-continuous, and in India we have the typical monsoon cycle, so we have two basic periods in the year when the wind direction is changing and the wind resources are very low. And of course, if you talk of solar, you definitely need storage to make it available beyond the sunlight hours. Nuclear that way provides you with a continuous power and continuous and reliable, dependable, dispatchable power. So the story of NTPC, though it started in 2011, actually started taking off much later. So the last 3 years have seen a lot of action, and the joint venture company, once created, was made operational. The first joint venture project, Mahi Banswara, 4 of 700 megawatt units, has got off the ground, which means we have all the statutory clearances, including the AERB clearance for the site. And now we have the contractor at site for the excavation work, and we are waiting for AERB clearance for start of excavation. Now, typically, if you look at nuclear project, I'll just give you a very short overview. You need to select a land. To select a land, you need certain basic conditions. The basic conditions are that it should be at least 5 to 6 kilometers away from a known fault line, should be seismically non-active zone, should have water available in the near vicinity. The land and the near vicinity of the project should have slightly, preferably reduced population density. And of course, it has to be at least 15 to 16 kilometers away from known population centers or defense establishments and major industry establishments. So putting all these conditions together, there are not very many places across the country where you could really put up a nuclear project. So therefore, NTPC embarked on a process of site selection. And we've identified around 30 plus sites across the country where the discussions are on with the state governments and the site-specific studies are on to establish the siting. Now, this is an activity that takes about 7 to 8 months, that siting activity. And then you have to compile the report and submit it to DAE to get the clearances for the site to be declared as a nuclear site. Now, once that happens, then your site acquisition activity starts. You wouldn't like to buy land in a place where you are not sure you can put up a nuclear project or not. So once that surety is there, that's your zero date, start acquiring land. Typical land acquisition, and you must have an idea of how much land is required. So if you're talking of 2 of 700 or 2 of 1000 megawatt units, the typical land requirement is about 1200 acres, 1200 acres. If we talk of 4 units, then it'd be about 1600 acres, and a 6-unit configuration typically takes about 2000 acres. This is primarily because we have a 1 kilometer zone around the project which has to be within the control of the project authority, which means we have a boundary wall around it, so to acquire that land. So with that kind of land acquisition, the typical period for acquisition of such a land, even the best possible efforts and initiatives would be about 2 to 2.5 years. And then parallel to that, you would be doing all your site-specific studies and submitting the reports to AERB to get the clearances. That takes time. So typically, for the first 3 or 4 years, you're only acquiring land and doing the site-specific studies. And after that, actually, once you receive the excavation clearance from the regulator, your project physically takes off with a ground break. And then from the first pour of concrete, typically 5.5 years is what is required before the unit becomes critical. So that is the kind of time frame we are looking at. So let us see. We are the newest boys on the block. So of course, I'm saying we are. I have just superannuated from NTPC. So my team is the newest boys on the block, and they would be trying to bring in this project as soon as possible. Yes, the regulator is strict. Yes, the regulator has requirements. And yes, we must all realize that nuclear energy is a sector in which you cannot afford a mistake, because a mistake is catastrophic. And therefore, everybody in this industry has to have the right kind of mindset to get everything right the first time. The best engineering practices, the best safety practices, and a project that can deliver on time at a commercially available rate. So I think that is what we are looking for, and that is the story of NTPC.
Right, thank you. And has, maybe you can pick that mic. Has the Shanti Bill been a big fillip for you? It's almost like a binary question. Yeah.
Answer is no, because NTPC was compliant even to the old law, and therefore NTPC was going ahead even under the old regime. The new regime obviously does not really change the ground reality materially for us, but yes, now we have the Shanti Bill has given us structure to regulate the nuclear industry and to spread and grow the nuclear industry. But we need the business rules to be issued. I think the Honorable Minister has suggested that it would take about 3 to 4 months for the business rules to be issued. And that is the time where we have to see how it happens, because without the rules, the private sector cannot take off.
Okay, so public sector can still continue, but private sector needs the rules. I'll go to Mr. Sharma, Amit Sharma, CEO and MD of Tata Consulting Engineers, who has actually told me about how long he has been associated with this question. So the same opening questions to you.
Sure. Yeah. Morning. So let me just give you introduction on what Tata Consulting Engineers have been doing for last many years. For last 50 years, we've done almost all nuclear plants in India for the civil power generation. And I think Shanti Bill is historic. At the G20, we wrote the first SMR for the Niti Aayog DAE combination. It was well appreciated. Over the last 50 years, we've been part of the initial reactors, followed by 220 megawatt PHWR, which became 540, then the 700 fleet that's currently going. And we were also working very closely with the policymakers pre-Shanti Bill to look at the modularization for the 220 megawatt PHW, or called the Bharat Small Reactor, BSR. So extensive experience across the entire supply chain in nuclear, both from capital side to the fuel and related strategies to modularize and standardize. I feel that this bill is historic because it recognizes one simple fact, that unlike the rhetoric in the West about carbonization, decarbonization, data centers, India needs energy. I think that's the basic fundamental need. Unlike the West, which is plateaued, our energy requirement will go from current 8,000 terawatt hours annually to more than 24,000 terawatt hours in the next 15 to 20 years, which means we need all kind of energies, right? And there's a direct correlation, proportionality between energy and the GDP and the economic growth. So it's not small reactors versus big reactors, solar, wind, gas, oil. We need all of it. Today, out of the 8,000 terawatt hours, only 14% is electricity. So we need to obviously up the game with electrification. But the simple fact remains that all kinds of energy is required. It's not a competition. It's a coexistence. And I believe Shanti Bill will help us reach levels, for example, seen in Finland, France, earlier in Japan. Japan was about 50 gigawatts of nuclear pre-Fukushima. And today, the German parliament and the Japanese parliaments are discussing that should they go back to nuclear. And so indeed, nuclear is cleanest form of energy. Lot people think it's not cheap. Actually, it is the cheapest form of energy. It has the highest energy return on investment. So if you put in $100 in the nuclear life cycle, you get 75 times of the energy put in, as compared to coal, which is 30 times, solar, which is just 3 times. So these are the metrics, and we're very closely working with folks. And post Shanti, we feel that now with the gates open for private sector, viability of their investments, assurance of fuel, and a strong regulator will drive a rapid uptake and private interest. Of course, the PSUs like NTPCs, as well as Indian Railways, which is on electrification, will continue to leverage the Shanti Bill.
Thank you. And you were telling how Mr. Ratan Tata himself was involved in this. So we see a milestone happening in the Shanti Bill, but it's a progression which happens in different ways and different stories there.
Yeah, interestingly, thanks Anish for saying that. The first chairman of Tata Consulting Engineers was Dr. Sethna, who took over when Dr. Baba, then Dr. Sarabhai, and we lost both of them. So it was Dr. Sethna that actually took India's nuclear ambition forward. And he became our first chairman in the early days. So the DNA of this company was very much nuclear. But interestingly so, it was Mr. Tata, Mr. Ratan Tata, about 4 or 5 years back. In 2004, he was championing the National Hydrogen Mission, as well as the 123 agreement. At that time, Ambassador David Mulford and Condoleezza Rice, along with the erstwhile government, had signed the historic bill. But it was because of the fears of Bhopal and Chernobyl, which was in minds of people, and unfortunately Fukushima happened a few years later, that we had a civil liability clause. So I think the Shanti Bill merged the atomic energy and the civil nuclear liability and created it in aligned to global norms. But it was Mr. Tata who really pushed us all and got the industry, policy makers, Niti Aayog, DAE together. I'm sure he would be very pleased as to how India has finally launched the Shanti Bill. And it was his efforts that galvanized the private and the public sector and policy makers to come together to write this historic bill.
Yeah, even when he's not there, we know that his wishes would always be there with us, and he's watching.
Sure.
Dr. Lele, to you bring a very different dimension to this question. And we were talking, Mr. Sharma was talking about the fuel and fuel security. That's a big question still. So maybe from your standpoint, the same thing. And how are you involved? I know that you're involved in from a very different angle. And how do you see this progression happening?
Thank you so much, and good morning to you all. Uh, I think I come from an entirely different space than the other panelists over here. I'm not a nuclear expert per se. I come from a think tank called IDSA, which is a fully autonomous think tank, fully funded by Ministry of Defense. So I come from a different background, the way we are looking at the issues so-called nuclear. We look at issues nuclear essentially from a weapon perspective. So essentially my job revolves around weapons of mass destruction. But why I'm sitting over here is that because today's age, we are talking of not only nuclear from a weapon perspective, we are talking of a nuclear from a security perspective. The energy security becomes the key factor over here. So we are trying to look at a nuclear energy also from a energy security perspective. Because in today's times and worlds, when we are talking of a security per se, it's not only a military security, but it revolves around your water security, your food security, and energy security becomes a very important part of it. So I come from that background. As far as Santi bill is concerned, I think we got to slightly have to develop a context as far as why this bill is there. In fact, as it was already mentioned about 123 agreement, you had Strope Talbot, Jaswant Singh talks, which subsequently came with the next government, and we had certain amount of things which happens around 2008 when 123 agreement was accepted. Subsequently, it so happened that it still took tremendous amount of a time and you can say a force from Indian system to allow the US to get India out of sanctions. So because of India's nuclear blast, say particularly 1998, the Pokhran 2 blast, we were under a so-called technological apartheid and no technology was shared with us. And on top of that, we are not a signatory to the NPT. So everybody in the world was not ready to accept India as a power whom they can deal in the arena of a nuclear energy. But I think over a period of time now we have achieved all those things. And now we are looking at the Shanti Bill as an extension of what actually we were suffering because of a technological apartheid and no technology was given to us. Now we have come a long way from that. As it was rightly mentioned, it is actually amalgamation of two bills. The first bill, which was in 1962, if I'm not wrong, which was actually saying that state has got a total monopoly. So this bill allows the monopoly of a state to get over in a nuclear sector. The other thing is that supplier was also held responsible in case of some possible accidents along with the operator. So that bill also has been now taken care of. Now we are having a Shanti bill. So we have to look at it in this perspective that there were certain amount of a technological limitations as far as the technology transfer was concerned. In the arena of a nuclear field, one can say that we are not member of a NSG because you got to be NPT signatory to become that. But still we have got a waiver over there. Then as far as the entity list is concerned, where BARC and other agencies were put by the US particularly, by 2025 we are out of that entity list also. Now along with Shanti Bill and all other structures which are in place, particularly we got 49% FDI has also been permitted. I think now the time has come for India to attract the investments from the outside industries along with the Indian industries to take the mission of, it's a very ambitious mission one can say over here. We will talk of the statistics whether we can achieve 100 gigawatt or not by 2024 or 2047. But having ambitions, there is no harm into it because if you got major ambitions, then only you will work towards it. And I look at Shanti Bill as a first step in that direction.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to go over to Dr. Palash Srivastava from IIFCL, and Dr. Lele brought out the points around private sector and financing, and this is where you come in, possibly with your perspectives on how the scene is changing, and your role in that and the Shanti Bill.
Yes, thank you so much. I think at IIFCL we've seen changes happen, transformative change happen. Whether it was the road sector, the hybrid annuity model, the first set of roads, and now it's actually become the norm. Whether it was the infrastructure investments through the Sagarmala in the port-led development frameworks, or whether it was the setting up of NIF, which is basically, so we've incubated a lot of these ideas and continue to look at very strategic areas like space, infrastructure, with the satellite constellations that in space has. So we've advised and also looked at frameworks for financing there. And also aerospace and defense. Now, this, of course, has been on our watch list along with hydrogen. And we've been looking at testing some basically appraisal methodologies and frameworks. So I think the Shanti Bill is actually a great step forward because it actually acknowledges the private sector's role in taking this forward and also identifies various, so the regulator has been strengthened, basically default or claims mechanisms have also been articulated. So there is an ecosystem which now is seeming to be in place for the private sector to get started. However, what I would like to really highlight from our experience of handling large transformative change in infrastructure sector is that there is a, you have to capture the imagination of the entire ecosystem, then you have to actually do what Vajpayee did to, very poetically, the golden quadrilateral. So you have to have an impact investment framework where every player in the value chain is able to associate himself and say that, okay, this is going to really last, and that there is a vision and there is a program. And also, to a certain extent, I would say that there is a need for modularity in contracting, modularity and standardizing in contracting. Because, see, I think the first attempt at our cell phone penetration, if you see, was actually a disaster. And then when we articulated it in terms of, circles based licensing and then progressing. So I think there is a need for a transformative framework of action. Of course, bill and rules will only do so much. But I think beyond the bill and the rules, we need to really work on a framework which, as has already been mentioned, that the nuclear space, I would say, or the site is so much of a rarity or a speciality that if we really want to, programmatically move on this frame, it definitely has to have a, say, framework of action, and imagination of people has to be, fired so that we really go the 10 times that we are really, aiming for.
Right. Thank you. I'm going to actually do a follow-on question for you as I go into a little more detail on some of the list. Infrastructure comes in various ways, and roads, ports, all of that. How similar is nuclear to the other forms of capex-heavy infrastructure, and how is it different?
See, I think it's very evident, long gestation periods, a little bit of, let's say, externalities, a lot of externalities, long, period of, payback, that actually is the lens very much, it is very similar to some of the infrastructure sectors. But having said that, if you were to look at a pure play port, which becomes very, very commercial in terms of once the site is actually provided, and then, it is like a commercial kind of an action, it's just a exchange through between private sectors or private parties. You don't really need too much of, say, just a certain waterfront and coastal, ecosystem management. But in this case, I think the entire value chain is actually from sourcing of fuel to enrichment to basically even going down to waste management is something which is involving a lot of regulatory action. And that actually makes it very unique. So it doesn't, while it is a PPP in a way, but it is not really a PPP unless, and would require, a certain, as I have already mentioned, modularity and standardizing of the contractual and procurement frameworks. so as to, liability management, because I think there is a certain, that is the difference from a typical infrastructure project.
So this is much more OpEx heavy, operating risk heavy, cost.
Yes.
If not the cost, the risks are very different at the OpEx operation stage as compared to a
Exactly.
traditional infra.
And it will take its own time for the private sector to really get used to taking or bearing that risk, or to be in that context of basically operating the business in that context. So I think that is, which what the PSUs have been able to really kind of able to master. I think the private sector will actually take a little time, and I think we should see some iterations around the rules so that it becomes easier going forward for operating a business. But I think as distinct from typical infrastructure projects, there are also other benefits like medical and other aspects, which the applications. So it is amenable to further more applications rather than just power. So
Yeah.
there are certain byproducts which actually are amenable to flogging for more revenues and making it further more viable, of course.
Yeah, it's not just 75 per times the energy, but more than that, there are many other benefits.
But other benefits which come
will
along.
Of course, those we'll see as it goes. But you pointed out about modularization and standardization, and Mr. Sharma, you pointed about that this is the cheapest form of energy. But that's not how the world looks at it, or that's not how India looks at it. How do we make that, how do we demystify that? And especially with modularization and fleet style development, factory production, what is the cost outlook?
Yeah, I think we need to be very careful about creating a mindset when we adopt something new without facts and maths done properly. Let me share with you that in fact nuclear over the years have had a negative story for obvious reasons, that it started with more defense and military focus. And the reason the West adopted uranium rather than thorium was because of the byproduct that uranium gave. Otherwise, the original plan was actually to do thorium because it didn't have byproducts that could have been used for purposes of strategic nature. Having said that, if you go back in time, it was the EVs that were created, but eventually the petrol and diesel hydrocarbons took over, and we are back to EVs now. So first, nuclear has been very safe. All the icebreakers, aircraft carriers, submarines that go around, they've had a very safe track record. Of course, India has embarked on it recently, but the West has had this. So first, it's safe. I think this story around, Chernobyl, 3 Mile, and Fukushima, along with the movie Oppenheimer, it doesn't do real justice to the safety that nuclear provides. Second, in terms of price points, let me give you some metrics. And we wrote this SMR paper during the G20, for which we did a lot of research based on our 50 years of database. First, it has the lowest cement use for a given megawatt. Compare that with hydro, huge cement. The only energy production entity, less cement and partially 10-20% is gas-based power generation. Every other form has more cement usage than nuclear. Second, it has the lowest water consumption. In terms of levelized carbon dioxide, it is even lower than wind generation, which is traditionally thought the lowest, but it is even lower than that. So I think these are mathematical facts. And as I said, the EROI, it is 75 times. Hydro is about 50, so it's the best. Compare that to solar and wind, 3 to 5. Now, how is this possible? Let me say that all nuclear reactors for last 50 years have had modularity built in. Now, the only difference is we had 4 or 5 modules. There's a core reactor, there's a steam generator, there is some turbine generator outside the nuclear island, and it's already modularized. The reason is, if it's not modular, then you'll be experimenting with things. The only thing when you do in situ is seismic changes. So if you are in a seismic zone 2 or 3, you have to have a different geotechnical and civil engineering. However, look at Japan. Japan has seismic 4 and 5, and it had the highest number of reactors. So seismicity can also be removed from the complexity of having nuclear power. Modularity comes in the second form, which is in terms of integrating so that you can do a factory module. If you can create a factory module of 20, 30, you can ship it, plug it in by decoupling the seismic and civils. The third modularity comes in financials and contractual. 33% of nuclear plant money gets wasted because of interest cost. Because the average time it takes for capex between 6 to 9 years. Now modularity can cut that by one third to 2/3. You will reduce all the interest during construction, which is IDC. So 33% of non-value add, which is the interest during construction, if that goes away, the viability of the capex increases. Lastly, I will say, with modularity, with small modular reactors, which is what can be afforded by the private sector, considering we are talking about $2 to $3 million per megawatt. You know, I would rather put that money in my core business than producing power for which I have 4 to 5 years of wait. So if we reduce that, the levelized cost of energy calculations come in the range of 5 to 6 rupees, and it's a base load power. So you don't need storage like you need in solar or any other green form like hydro. That makes it very, very economical. Lastly, in terms of operations, I would like to remove a myth. Nuclear is the least training intensive industry when it comes to power generation, because it has most other forms would have a lot of moving parts. It's like, you know, energy heating up water and the water turning to steam and driving turbines. Less moving parts, very few pumps and circulating systems. And of course, PHWR has had world record for 940 days of continuous operations. And it's a daily fueling cycle, unlike BWR and PWR, where you can, based on the energy uranium enrichment, continue non-stop for 5 to 8 hours. But it also means that you've shut it and ran it, and you don't know what's going wrong. In PHWR, because of the daily fuel cycle, you know exactly what's going on with that. So few myths: very less operational requirements, lowest cost of energy, very safe, and last but not the least, the most important focus has to be a strong independent regulator and a fuel assurance, because fuel, even post Shanti, is government controlled. And for private sector to get a proper backstop and insurance, continuity of the plant is very important, for which fuel is the most essential requirement.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. I want you to add, but I'm just going to put one point which you made earlier, that in where India stands, it's what we call an and strategy, because our energy needs are so far high, you know, that we are not choosing one against another. And I think this is something the general narrative has to induct, you know, because otherwise this just
No,
pits
Anish,
one
you're
against
right.
another.
I think, you know, I want to impress upon that maximum. Unlike the West, in all the calculations done everywhere else, which has plateaued in its energy requirement, and maybe the CAGR is 2-3%. For us, we're going from 8,000 terawatt hours to 24,000 terawatt hours. Our electricity today is 14% of 8,000 terawatt hours. We have to go to minimum 40% with electrification, EV, transportation becoming electric. So it's not at all a competition between a large reactor, small reactor, solar, wind. We need a combination of all of this.
Everything.
And it becomes very interesting with the hybrid grid. We need grid stability. Because when the industry starts, or you have a large induction motor that starts up, the amperage required in the grid is so high that you need physical flywheels and virtual flywheel. So when I say virtual flywheel, it's a grid following, which is like solar and wind. Grid forming is base load. So that's like thermal, nuclear. Without this combination, your grid won't function. And that's why India is very unique. We will continue to be hungry for energy, which means coexistence of all forms of energy is a must.
Thank you. And just to put in context, the West, in parts of the West are not just plateauing, they're dipping. Europe, by 2047, we are going to require much more energy than Europe collectively. So I think that's a context to keep in mind. And often when we see criticism or opinions from other parts of the world, they forget this context very quickly. Mr. Paul, your comments, just follow-on comments, but also I just want to pick up one thing, because NTPC has been ahead from if you leave NPCIL out, NTPC has been ahead of the others. What have been the key challenges in the supply chain, contracting structures, people? Is there something which you want to add on in perspective on how we can really scale up on these matters to really meet the target?
Okay, so let me begin from where Amit has left off. While I agree with most of what Amit has said, if you look at the energy sector in this country, there's no escaping the fact that we need substantial amount of capacity addition to the grid. And that substantial amount of capacity addition would need substantial investments. Now the problem is, you have to have, and therefore you have to have a basket approach. In that basket, there would be coal-based power, there'd be hydro, there'd be various forms of renewables, there'd be large nuclear, small nuclear. Every kind of technology would have to be leveraged in that basket to achieve the kind of efficiency and the cost economics that the grid is ready to pay. But typically what happens in Indian kind of a scenario is everybody starts comparing to the available cost of power versus the incoming cost of power. Now, if the incoming cost of power is going to be slightly more based on the cost projections today, the industry would be reluctant to induct that kind of a technology. And that is what we have a fear, or we perceive maybe a fear in inducting nuclear. Because once you quote international prices, the kind of figures that come in would definitely take this X-bus power of nuclear energy more than perhaps what we call the coal parity. Now, like it or not, in this country, there is a certain kind of power available on the grid, and the coal-based power plants being the highest in number. So coal parity is what is always discussed whenever you talk of any new form of energy. Now, if I compare that with what had happened when we brought in renewables, the early days of renewables, the renewables came in at about 18, with a LCOE of around 18 rupees, which was at that point of time very difficult to sort of bring in, very difficult to sell on the grid. And therefore, various government support mechanisms and permutations, combinations worked out to make renewable acceptable. Now, once the scale started growing, the price started coming down, and from 18 rupees, you've come down to almost 2 rupees today. Now, is that kind of a scale possible in nuclear? The answer would be yes and no. There would be some scaling possible, but since nuclear is a regulated kind of an industry, we may not be able to sort of achieve the kind of ratios that we've achieved in the renewable space. Having said that, what is it that we as a country can do to ensure that the incoming technology is available at a commercially acceptable price? Now, this is something I'd like to draw a comparison at this stage to what we did as NTPC when NTPC inducted supercritical technology in the country. Now, the country needed that technology. There were very few manufacturers, and the local manufacturer did not have the economy of scales to negotiate large contracts. Now, to negotiate the technology transfer, what the government facilitated through NTPC was what we call the bulk tender. So, in large capacities, thermal plants were tendered out and ordered so that the Indian manufacturers had the business volume to negotiate a technology transfer. And that is how BHL could get the new technology. L&T MHI factory could be established, Toshiba established a new factory, Doosan established a new factory, and a whole ecosystem developed. Now, that is something what we were thinking we would like to promote in the nuclear field also. Because if we are bringing in multiple technologies from the world, then there has to be an economy of scale to drive the induction of the technology. And drive the induction of the technology at a price that the economy is ready to pay, and the grid is ready to bear, and the power should be commercially dispatchable. Now, as you asked me, what are the bottlenecks or the bridges that we faced and we need to cross. One of the bridges is the internationally quoted prices of technology and the kind of negotiations that the government has been having with different countries for already identified nuclear power projects, and the kind of figures which are floating in the market would tend to take nuclear power at a price level much beyond the so-called coal parity. You see, the newer coal-based power plants which are now under construction and likely to be commissioned are likely to have a X-bus LCOE of the order of around 6 to 7 rupees a unit, a kilowatt hour that is. Now, if my incoming nuclear plant 10 years down the line is going to come in with a target price of power X-bus maybe 8 rupees, then I as an investor today may start having second thoughts. Now there are various ways to do it. One of the ways is the economy of scale, as I said, for which we as NTPC had sought permission of the Government of India to go ahead with bulk tenders, and I understand that the Government of India has indicated that NTPC may go ahead with that. So that would be one direction. The second direction that we are looking at is the green taxonomy. Now you see, if you're looking at long-term investment, and you should be able to get funds at a reduced interest rate. Today, the green taxonomy does not support the nuclear industry because the nuclear industry is still marked red by the environmentalists. So the Government of India has taken that up, and the Government of India would be driving that initiative to bring the green taxonomy to the nuclear industry. Now, once that happens, all sorts of green funding would be available for the nuclear industry, therefore bringing down again the cost economics of implementing a nuclear project. The other thing which is being discussed in various levels in the government is how do we sort of extend the kind of incentives and facilities that we are giving to the renewable industry, whether those incentives and taxation benefits, etc., could be passed on to the nuclear industry. If that happens, again, the cost would come down. Now, typically, if all these were put in together, my anticipation and the kind of calculations that my team has done in NTPC in the past is, with all these things, maybe we'll be able to achieve coal parity for nuclear projects for the next 10 to 15 years. Now, if that happens, then suddenly nuclear becomes sellable. So that is what we are really looking at. The other part which I tend to disagree with Amit is the kind of training required. See, while it is agreed that the number of people to be trained is less, and the number of movable machines, movable parts is less, the criticality of training in a nuclear industry is very high, because an operator can be put on the desk only after he clears a certain number of years of operational experience, followed by a certification exam being conducted by the regulator. That being said, no operator can come on the desk to run the plant without at least 5 to 7 years of experience and having cleared the certification exam. Today, we simply do not have the base cadre to be able to support the kind of operational staff requirements that would be there 10 years from today. So if we are to plan for 10 years from today, today is the right time. We have to recruit those engineers, train them, deploy them in the existing nuclear plants, get them trained, and make them capable to take over the newer plants which would be commissioned maybe 10 years from now. So at 2032, as you said, there's a certain capacity planned till 2032, and beyond 2032, maybe we are planning of 5 to 6 gigawatts per year capacity addition. Then the kind of operational manpower required would also be that kind of high. So therefore, we have to plan from today. The time is right. We don't need to run, but we need to plan from today and start from today. And that's what NTPC is trying to do. We have established already training facility in our Noida establishment, and we are taking support from Department of Atomic Energy officers who are both serving and retired, and bringing them in to train the NTPC people, so that we have 2 or 3 streams. One stream is the experts being trained by BARC. One stream is the experts being trained by Nuclear Power Corporation of India, who have an established training establishment. And the third stream now started is with NTPC, with the support of BARC, DAE, and NPCIL, we have started the third stream. Now, if we are to achieve 100 gigawatt, we will need a 4th, 5th, and 6th stream, which I believe the private sector can chip in for that.
Quickly,
Quick, we, Prasenjit and me can have this debate, but 2 points. Number one, we need to look at nuclear with Make in India and modularity. If we are looking at the power of contracts and commercial negotiations to drive costs down, it ain't going to happen. Make in India with Indian price point, Indian supply network is the only way to get the grid price we want. Today, if we are at 6 rupees, 8 rupees, 5 rupees, compare the West. They are already at 30, 40 rupees, the electricity that comes to a house, residential. And industrial is almost touching $1. And this is at Texas. This is, which is the lowest in the US. Look at Norway or Sweden or UK. The prices are crazy. For those price points, their nuclear is justified. If you look at that nuclear for us, it's 10 times the cost. The only way to drive costs down is make in India through complete technology transfer or collaborations with the best, and also looking at PHWR, number one. Number two, I strongly believe, I think, the comparatives needs to go away. You cannot compare running a thermal power plant with a nuclear power plant. It's like, I have a great bike. I have an operator that runs the bike. And of course, the person has to be trained for a Formula One car. But you look at a Formula One car without comparison to what the bike rider is. That's how we need to look at operational aspects. Because if a comparison is done with something which is not apple to apple, it's not the right comparison. And I think I would say the most important part is fuel and regulator. Rest of the things are very much capable. The Indian Navy, of course, was the first to put in reactors in submarine. And look at the Navy, one of the best forces. They were able to, leverage that without much change issues. And I think Group Captain Lele could talk about that a bit.
Yeah. I think we'll need one more session for fuel and regulator in particular, because those are open questions we haven't had the time to discuss, and then those are very, very important issues. I've been told that we're up on time, but just very quickly, starting from you, one enabler you want in place.
I would say the impact program, which can capture the imagination and can fire the ecosystem.
Sir.
I think based on the discussion, I just would like to mention one point over here about human reliability. Nuclear is a dangerous stuff. Couple of years back, there was an incident in Bach, if I'm not wrong. Somebody was not given a casual leave and he had said that I contaminated the water cooler. So nuclear is a serious business, and we got to have those things very clear when you actually do the expansion of that.
Okay, no casual attitudes, no casual leave challenges. Okay, Amit.
Yeah, see, privatization of nuclear is about accelerated approach, innovation, and combination of public and private for us to leapfrog and accelerate. It's not about capital. It's about a combination of much more professional work with coexistence between both public and private. And for private, certainty matters. And certainty requires two clear areas. Policies, including fuel assurance, because if you don't have backstops, if you don't have, the lenders won't really give you because your returns are not guaranteed. Fuel assurance is very important. We need to deleverage that like we have today, lithium and oil and gas dependence. So thorium shift is very important. Thorium is what we have in this country as one of the largest. The second is a very strong independent regulator that looks at specifications rather than a research mode. Because if you're in research mode, your projects will not be done in a timely manner, severely impacting the IRRs. So if a private sector has to look, and we've seen strong support by the private sector, they are looking at the government assurance on fuel and regulatory aspects.
Thank you. And Mr. Pal.
Yeah. I think the Shanti Bill has done a great job of creating the right kind of structure to ensure that the nuclear industry takes off. And as my co-panelists have mentioned, it is now a matter of a very professional, accelerated approach to inducting nuclear energy in the grid. And that can be done through, as I always say, a basket approach by leveraging all the possibilities and using the best available technology. And we have to see ways and means on how to sort of implement it. For me, one enabler beyond the Shanti Bill would be the green taxonomy. If the green taxonomy and the green funds are available, I think the economics would simply work out very positive. Thank you.
Thank you, and what a fantastic panel. Thank you, and we will set up the next one. We'll find a way to get you all together for the next one. Thank you so much for your views.
Yes, yes, one question is fine.
My question is very straight, sir, to Sharmaji. Sir, considering the technology support from Holtec International and TCE and L&T becoming the Indian partners, with commercials agreed, how much time do you see a typical SMR 300 would take to start generating the power?
So yes, we've got the US DOE clearance with Holtec. They are going to have the first reactor in Palisade, which is a revival program. But they are under their own stages of approval, right? So I would say Holtec first reactor in US is 2030. Adoption by us through all regulatory will be 2032 onwards. The fastest way for India to embark on this is, of course, the current 700 megawatt PHWR, which NTPC is looking at, and the private sector. But the small modular reactor of 220 megawatt PHWR, we have 23 of them running with world record. If we modularize that, the first SMR in India could be well by 2029. And so that would make us the fastest country to adopt an SMR. Most of these SMRs are on PowerPoint slides. Except, of course, the aircraft carriers and submarines. But 220 is a sweet spot, indigenous technology. We plan to modularize that and really get for the private sector to adopt it very fast in the 4 boundaries. So no tariff issues, 100% captive requirements, and within the 4 boundaries.
Just a supplementary question. How much will be the per megawatt cost for that thing?
So I'll give you perspective. The last 220 was in Kaiga in 2012. It was at 6 crores per megawatt capex. But if you put all the inflation and everything, our calculations are anywhere between 15 crore to 20 crore. The 700 megawatt with the NTPC and NPCIL is about 18 crores today. But I'm confident with what they call as the first of its kind versus nth of its kind, and a bulk procurement, we're talking about 15 to 16 crore per megawatt.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for highlighting such good insights on this very important topic. And I'm a big Formula fan as well, Formula One fan. Looking forward to the next season. And thank you so much, everyone.